In this presentation, we will discuss accounting related to colleges and universities. When considering colleges and universities, we typically break them out into two sections, one section being the public, second section being private. Now, when we think about the private universities, we could further break out into a not-for-profit universities and colleges and the for-profits. But this is the two distinctions we want to have primarily because of the first item here, that being, for example, on the public side, we consider it a governmental entity as opposed to a non-governmental entity. And that then is going to drive some of the accounting. When we think about the accounting for colleges, of course, there will be many similarities between public and private. But when we think about the public side of things, some of the characteristics will tend towards those items that will be similar to a governmental entity that we've discussed in a governmental entity. And some of the activities will mirror more closely to what we might see in a non-governmental, not-for-profit entity. So that's the distinction that we want to make. Large amounts of revenues from state appropriations and research grants when we think about the public types of schools and institutions and universities. Community colleges are included on the public side. So when you think about public side and the governmental type of accounting related to it, the community colleges will be included there. They get a lot of their revenue, however, from property taxes. So property tax assessments or property taxes for the city college is often a large portion of the revenue. On the private side, then, we're thinking about a non-governmental entity. So again, public, governmental, private, non-governmental. So there'll be many similarities between the two types of schools in calculating or accounting for the two types of institutions. However, the governmental will lean towards the governmental accounting, and the private will lean towards more the not-for-profit types of accounting, the non-governmental, not-for-profit types of accounting. You'll recall that when we think about non-profit types of entities, we can break those out into governmental not-profits and the not-for-profits, which are non-governmental. So these publics would be governmental not-for-profits in a sense. The private would mirror more closely to the non-governmental not-for-profits, although they can have for-profit entities as well within the private side. Most of revenues are from tuition, private contributions, and research grants, and they can be not-for-profit or for-profit. So note that on the private side, they can be for-profit or not-for-profit. So a little bit of thought about the types of regulations. You'll note that as with for-profit organizations and as with governmental organizations and non-profit organizations, the types of regulations and procedures that are going to be used and then standardized and then regulated have changed over time. So it started out that the AICPA audit guide was the major guidance here for colleges and universities. And then at some point, the GASB, G-A-S-B, takes control of the public colleges and universities. And that would make sense, of course, because GASB is basically the guidelines that would be related to governmental type of entities. And if we think about the universities as governmental type of entities, it would make sense that GASB would kind of take control of them as far as the regulatory entities and the regulations involved. FASB, F-A-S-B, revised the reporting design for private colleges and universities. So after this point in time, then FASB was still basically involved with private colleges and universities and possibly mirroring some of the changes made by GASB for the public side. FASB did some remodeling on their side for the private colleges and universities. And then GASB significantly adjusted the reporting design for public colleges and universities. So you can see there's been some changes, some evolution with regards to the universities. Note, if you think about the changes and evolutions all over the place, as accounting as a whole, we had basically for-profit type of accounting that we applied to everything, not-for-profit, for-profit, and whatnot. And then, of course, governmental accounting became something that started to think that should be separate. Then, of course, non-profit accounting also became something that was thought of as had separate types of needs. And then within these categories, which kind of cross over, as you can see here with the universities and colleges, specific kind of industry type of areas with regards here to universities and colleges could then further have some type of specialization and some type of specialized needs and regulations related to them. Private colleges and universities. So now we're considering the private colleges and universities, not the governmental entities, would be the non-governmental entities, either not-for-profit or for-profit. FASB requires private colleges and universities to report on the changes in net assets without donor restrictions and net assets with donor restrictions. So note that's going to be very similar to a the not-for-profit, non-governmental type of entities. This reporting is the same as the non-governmental, not-for-profit organizations. So when we looked at the non-governmental, not-for-profit organizations, you'll recall that we had some tracking of the items that were with restrictions and without restrictions. And then when we closed out, say, the income statement type of accounts to what would be similar to equity type of accounts, we had a breakout within what would be similar to the equity, which is called the net assets accounts, net assets that have with restrictions, net assets that do not have restrictions. We're going to have to do that same type of tracking information with regards to or related to the private colleges and universities. Public colleges and universities. So now we're considering on the public college and university side. Public colleges and universities can use the guidance for special purpose governments engaged only in business type activities, engaged only in governmental activities, or engaged in both. However, most public colleges and universities follow the model for public institutions engaged only in business type activities.